build on, and then they start automatically growing their ability to think about goals.
Inspiring. And that's what I was talking about earlier. I mean, we look at this in our life and we say to ourselves, well, how can someone think that way? But it's like you said, you don't know, because there's so many reasons why someone could be going through something and they feel there's no way out possible, or like you said, that, the world would be better off without them.
Yes.
That there's no real reason for them to be there. Maybe thoughts that nobody loves them or cares about them.
Yeah. No, yeah, of course. And just being able to have that space to talk about it is huge, because many people that are having these thoughts are not communicating them.
Right.
There's those that already are reaching out for help, that already are voicing what they're hurting in, which is great. That's huge. But oftentimes they've been hurting so long before they were able to voice it. So it's really important that as we talk about this, that as we looked at our loved ones, children, adults, anyone of all ages, that we really pay attention to how we're going about life. Is there hopelessness? Do they realize their own talents? Do they realize how special they are, the importance they make in our lives?
Yeah.
Because oftentimes when people are in this state, they don't see that. And they honestly really believe the world would be better off without them. And in that moment, oftentimes their pain is so unbearable. And sometimes it could be hard for us to see it, especially if we compare it to maybe if we've gone through a similar situation than them, and we might be like, well, that was okay, I got over that, they'll get over it. But oftentimes they may be having a different.
I think it's important as a parent or even a teacher or a friend, like you said, to be a good listener. But is listening enough? You have to know these signs. And I think that's why this video is so important, is knowing those signs. And so thank you so much again for being here and helping us learn about this, because it's so important to know, to be able to identify, so that when you hear those signs, and then you can start to,
Really being able to help them.
Because it's about helping them. And being a friend or being a parent.
And same for if it's somebody that is going through it, because we talk a lot about helping others, but same with ourselves, that if we realize that, like I was open about myself, that it's something that I went through and it was for a long time and I did not ask for help, but then at the same time nobody ever asked me. Nobody ever asked me, like, do you like life? Do you have you ever thought about suicide? No one ever asked me that. So it was something that I maybe didn't even realize I had, or I never even thought about it until I became more exposed to this topic and learned a lot about it. And so I became very interested, because oftentimes we don't realize it, that we may be feeling, even though it's at a very low amount, we may be having some suicidal ideation.
Do you have experience with maybe that, where it might come back later, re-manifesting itself later on, because people didn't notice, or maybe somebody didn't say something?
Yes, definitely. To use myself as an example for that. For example, I remember the very first thought of not wanting to be alive, or even thinking about taking away my own life, at age 6 or 7. So I was really young, lived with my family. Everyone could have seen my family and thought everything was great. But there were things going on, most families have stuff going on. And so so as a middle child, I had a lot going on in my head. And so no one ever asked me about it. I remember having these thoughts vaguely, and then that was kind of it. I just remember having them, and that was no actual planning, no actual doing it or talking about it. I never told anybody. And then we could fast forward until maybe my teenage years, where a lot of the suicidality, which is like the hopelessness that we talked about, lack of purpose, one could say, I started to, so when we see oftentimes like sadness and depression and worthlessness, oftentimes there's some type of anger at the world going on. But in depression, you point that anger at yourself.
Right.
So instead of being angry at a situation or a person, you get angry at yourself. So that with that could come guilt, shame, just intense depression, and to where you're like, I deserve this, I don't deserve to be here, I'm worthless. And it's like pointed internally versus when you point it outwards.
Like a self-destructed mode.
Yes, exactly. And so oftentimes we can see those patterns of self-destruction in just other parts of life. It's very similar to suicide. And so when you're in the suicide mode or depressive mode, it's more of like it's pointed at yourself. But then in my teenage years, it started getting pointed at others. So I became a teenager, everything seems normal in my life, but then I started becoming very angry. And it's like, I just don't want to deal with anyone, becoming very aggressive, just a lot of problems in school with my siblings. And it was like this quiet little girl that seemed okay is now really angry. What's wrong with her? There's nothing bad going on in the house. Family can't pinpoint what's going on, but I'm becoming very aggressive. There's just a lot of that outwards going on. And then it turns into, I start going to college, study psychology, learn about some of these things. I freak out, and then all of a sudden it goes back inside. Like, who am I? Why am I doing this? Like, what's wrong with me? Maybe I should not be here. There's too many problems to deal with now. So it's like, it went internally to where throughout this whole time, my family had no idea that there was something like this going on with me. And because one could see teenagers and think it's normal for, you know, their hormones are changing.
Well, you hear that.
Mood changes.
You hear that, right?
Right.
It's just that age. It's just this. It's just that.
Yeah.
And it's like we have these little, we coin these terms for these things, but in actuality, it is something that really is painful, and somebody's going through something, and we're just giving it a name and saying, don't worry about it, you know?
Yeah, and oftentimes it can look like it's nothing just because we can't pinpoint the problem.
Right.
We can't say, oh, there's a trauma. Like, we can't see it clearly, and it's not a known problem.
Right.
We're just like, get over it. Just stop. You have to behave.
Right.
Why don't you just like act like, or we compare. You should be like your brother. You should be like your sister. Thinking, hey, your siblings are okay. Why aren't you okay? And
then I think there's some people who just don't want to deal with it, and so they just kind of brush it off.
Yes.
Right.
They might not want to pay attention or notice
for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, using that as an example for myself, it was until my college years that I became more aware of what was going on. And the more aware I became of the pain that I kept pushing and pushing, I was pushing it to become depressed, or I was pushing it to externalize it and be angry at people.
Right.
So it was this weird thing going on with my emotions. But once I became more exposed to, there's this thing called depression, or there's these mood swings, or this is what emotions are, and they're okay to have, and this is what emotions do if you suppress them. So the more I became aware of this and how family dynamics could sometimes put a play into this, the more aware I became, the more depressed I became at first. And so I started becoming again suicidal, where it was like, life is so hard, I will never heal all my problems. Why am I here? I don't want to be here. It was so much exposed. I was just so exposed to all my pain at once.
Wow.
College. So that's kind of what it did to me.
Wow.
But luckily I was in a good place with a good set of social support that were able to hear me out. And that were able to hear me say these things that are hard to say. Like, I don't want to live. I don't want to be here right now. People oftentimes will just want to block that, or they don't want to hear it.
Right.
They're just like, go see a therapist. That's it. But oftentimes, before we could ever see a therapist, we just want a friend, somebody to tell us that they're there, or that things will be okay.
Right.
And so, luckily, I did have a good social support. at that moment. And it became something that I started to actually voice. I started to tell my family about how it's been a thing since I was young. They were very surprised, extremely surprised, but I was able to work through it. And a lot of it was literally just acknowledging it and to talk about it. Like, hey, this really hurt me when we were kids. This would happen. And I know it doesn't seem like a big deal, but this was for me because I didn't want to be alive. And so just really talking about things that seem insignificant. So oftentimes we have things in our past that don't seem like a big deal. And we're like, why does that bother me?
Right.
And sometimes you have a memory of something that happened when you were a kid. And you're just like, why do I keep remembering when this person was picking on me? Or when my sibling was saying something mean? And it's like, we think it's not a big deal, but oftentimes if you're an adult and you're still having these thoughts or memories, it might be carrying more weight in your mind, your body, more than what you expect. So that was something that I learned from my own experiences, was that paying attention to every little thing that I went through in the past that was maybe others may even see as trivial, and to not really think it mattered, or I didn't want to think it mattered. It was something that really helped me heal through that. Also just having a purpose, feeling like I had talents, I had abilities, that I had like a calling in my life. For me also spirituality was a big piece. So that was something that helped me too in finding my identity. And oftentimes, maybe sometimes I wanted to mention, but it could be quite sensitive, but it's just in general, when we talk about spirituality or religion, I know it's a sensitive topic, but I think using my example of coming from a background of a lot of spirituality and religion being involved, there's times where we might be a little insensitive in that perspective too, where people just want to encourage others and just be like, read the Bible, you should know better, just God loves you. And those are great things, but oftentimes when you're in a state of feeling like you just don't want to live anymore, those are just not enough. Not saying that that's not good, but it's more of like you need more than that. You need more specific help in that sense. So like for myself, let's say oftentimes people, or I was told, or I remember hearing when I was young, if you commit suicide, you're gonna go to hell. And regardless of what
I heard that too.
Regardless if you believe in hell or not, or you believe in this, it's, to me, it stopped me from committing suicide. But I became trapped in fear. So now it's not that I was hopeful, like, oh, okay, life is so much better now. It was like, hearing that made me feel like now terrified. Like, okay, this world is horrible. I can't do nothing about it. If I try to get out of it, it will be worse.
I'm stuck in limbo.
So hopelessness went from like here to even higher. Like, okay, there's really no out. And one could say like, okay, well, it completed what you wanted. This person, I didn't kill myself. But I was stuck. And so oftentimes in spirituality, we want to talk about freedom. We want to talk about being free from any oppression, depression, any of the things that's going on with you. So we want to look at, maybe if we're going to use like Bible verses, we're going to use those Bible verses that are specific. We're not going to just say, read the Bible. We're going to get that verse. Like, what's that verse that you want to talk about hope? And you're going to talk about that one. You might be specific. Instead of talking about, regardless, or if not, you will go to hell if you commit suicide, regardless of your opinion of that. You just have to be mindful of what's the impact. Is the impact of that what you want to do right now? If your goal is to give them hope in life, we might want to hold off on that a little. Maybe we first want to talk about all the reasons why life is great. Why is God good? If you're saying God's good, why? Okay, maybe you could talk about all your own experiences of why. Maybe you could help them find that in themselves through prayer, meditation, maybe finding social support through churches, ways like that. So we really want to make sure that those resources that we have for us that may be different for everybody, but that we really look at the hope in it. So regardless of what perspective you may have about religion or spirituality, that you really use it for good, and that you really have that focus of we want to feel like we have a purpose. We want to treat hope. And I think that was the greatest learning I had in this when I dealt with my own suicidal ideation, was really acknowledging like, oh, what I was lacking was hope. And it was purpose, some type of identity. And that, yes, other things could stall it from escalating and becoming an actual suicidal attempt. But what we really want to focus on is reducing that hopelessness, increasing some type of hope, having some type of purpose. Because if you have a purpose in life, if you have goals, it's easier to know you're going to get over it. Yeah. So it's just like that breakup from 10 years ago. Like now you can look back and say, oh, it felt like it was the worst thing ever and I'm okay. So when you have that perspective, you could see, oh, I will be okay. But when you don't have that perspective and you don't think about, you can't look outside of what 5 years will look like, you can't see what even maybe next year will look like. And it's really hard to see that. You just think like, this is it, my life should be done. But when you have those goals, when you know what you're good at, so you're able to create them, when you have people in your life that you know you could count on, oftentimes that just naturally turns into just hope. Right.
And that's so important, because how do you go about asking someone if they're suicidal? I mean, that's such a difficult topic to begin with. Yes. How do you bring that up with your child? I mean, you're sitting there, you're noticing these tendencies, you're noticing this depression, you're noticing this type of behavior. Mm-hmm. How do you go about that first step? What is something that's,
Yeah, so I would definitely start very low, in the sense of maybe not even using the word suicide. Because if somebody would have asked me about suicide, I would have said no, because maybe I didn't really use that word or think that way. So oftentimes, ways that we could ask is just asking about just the basic of like, do you ever wish you weren't alive anymore? So that's a question you can ask yourself, you can ask somebody else, and maybe I can invite everyone listening to ask yourself. Do you wish you just don't want to be alive anymore? Yeah. And oftentimes, if the answer is yes, or do you currently feel that way, then it's like, okay, maybe we could escalate it a little bit. Right. And sometimes then we can now not just make it about whether you want to be alive or not, but have you ever thought about ending your life? And again, avoiding sometimes that word suicidal when people aren't so familiar with that word, but just talking about, do you ever just think about wanting to do something to end your life? Depending what they say there too. Or sometimes if you don't want to ask it so directly, you could first start talking about, sometimes people wish or they just feel like they should just go to sleep and wish they never woke up again. And it's like, have you ever felt that way? And make kind of not normalizing in the sense that this is a good thing that should be going on, but of like, this happens. It's like, do you ever feel that way? So oftentimes we recommend to start low like that when asking somebody, and then if they say yes, then okay, this is a concern, or this is something that we really want to prevent, or we even want maybe to even tell them. So let's say if it's with a friend or family member that you do feel comfortable enough to have these conversations, if they say yes, sometimes you can even let them know, do you know that's actually a sign of being suicidal? And I've actually had that conversation with people very close to me where they did not, and where they were like, what do you mean? No, I'm not suicidal. I'm like, well, actually, having those first thoughts of just not wanting to be alive anymore, or if we go again the religious route, sometimes people say, I just wish I could go to heaven, or I just want to go with God already. And it could sound beautiful, but oftentimes there's some underlying suicidality. It's not going to be here anymore. And so those are just things to really pay attention to, because people in all religions and all cultures, all ages go through this. So it's really important to be able to pay attention to cries of help, or pay attention to people that are expressing this.
And the more I'm listening, the more I'm learning, and the more I'm understanding. And the importance of everything I'm hearing, one of the most important is listening. Yeah. Listening to be able to identify, because without being able to identify, we're not going to know that something even exists. And then putting ourselves aside and looking at, okay, now how can I help without, like you said, being overbearing, being so, forceful. And, spend time listening, like you said, which brings us to, how can I help someone?
Right.
How do you, what is the first step? Who's feeling that?
Yeah, so definitely first is just really listening, hearing it out, what's going on in their mind, like what are their thoughts, and then what are the feelings attached to that, right. And even like what's that intensity as finding out like what, like how bad is it really for them, like having that conversation, not assuming that the
right.
pain,
right.
or that like if one, like let's say if somebody has gone through I guess we could use that breakup. So one person went through a breakup and then they're helping another person, and then they might think, oh, I just went through one, so it must be the same. But
I know what that feels like. No, you don't. You don't know how I feel.
It could have similar things, but
right.
no, it's not going to be the same. So it's really paying attention
yeah.
to the intensity of how it's impacting them. Okay. Often even telling them how much you care about them, because oftentimes people may be going through losses or problems, right. And so just letting them know that you care about them. So if somebody like starts talking about maybe even they don't feel like they matter in this world, maybe it's just letting them know honestly why they do matter to you. Yeah. And so that's often like a really big thing, because sometimes we don't even communicate that with family members. We assume we all know we love each other, and we assume. When
I was a kid, my dad, we did not hug. There was none of that. You didn't, get to school. that was the extent of his love to me. And, so a lot of us grow up detached.
Yeah.
And we get older and we kind of assume that's just how things work. And then all of a sudden we find out in the great big world, that's not how it works. Well, so then we begin to think, oh, well, is there something wrong with me? Because that's how I grew up, Mm-hmm. And so listening, being able to identify and
that just ties into, I would say, almost like every problem in the world that you could have in life is relational.
Right.
Like everything that you could be going through in one way or another often ties into something relational. It's problems with people, and it's like having those interactions with others are so important. Oftentimes we want to think that we are independent or we don't need anybody, but we are social creatures. We were created to be with families, be with others, to be in communities, and that's just how we naturally thrive. So really just allowing yourself to be in that state really helps, because oftentimes we see that people that do commit suicide were very isolated at times too in those moments. So we really want to prevent that from happening. Of course, some people need their one-on-one, their alone time. Some people just want to relax. That's how they gain energy, is just by the introverts versus extroverts.
The me time.
Yeah. People just need that more than others.
Right.
But then it's where it starts unhealthy.
Yeah.
So you're so isolated that you're not getting up for work in the morning. You're missing school. You just never want to go out with friends.
Staying at home on the cell phone in bed all day. on the console. And what is that? I mean, you see a lot of kids now, and they spend so much time on that device. And it's not just any particular. It'll be a console, it'll be a phone, something. And you'll hear the kids say, oh, well, all my friends. But there is no friends. And you're like, just go outside. How do you deal with that?
I think that all ties to that piece that we all need, that social piece. But yes, nowadays kids have different options of how to connect, and sadly sometimes those connections aren't real connections, to where there are improvements in the sense that there are now like automated, like AI like the automated intelligence machines, that they actually do have some like texting that it's automated, and if you, it's almost like crisis lines too, that you can like text if you need help, and then they respond. They're like programmed in ways that it sounds like what a human would say, but it doesn't compare to actually a real human hear you out and talk to you, especially when you're going through problems. Because yes, having friends online or through social media or consoles, like, yes, it could seem like interactions, but when we're talking about mental health problems, when we're talking about depression, suicide, anxiety, all of that, those are things that we really heal through other people. So when we even talk about like therapy, like that's another person being there. Like I remember one of the main things I got out of therapy was just to be able to say anything and know that person is paid not to say anything that's confidential. And I was like, they cannot tell anybody. And just to see their reaction. Like I remember saying things I've never told anybody, and I just wanted to see their reaction, and seeing that they still seemed okay, that they accepted me, acted like it was all okay. And it was just, that was very healing to me. To be like, whoa, I was so scared to tell any other human this, but this human was okay, and they still seem to care about me, and they're helping me through, and they're not that surprised. And that was a piece that healed me. And that made me more comfortable to later try that with friends and families, to be like, okay, maybe my problems aren't that bad. Maybe I could tell somebody else. So when we look at it through just a social friendship perspective, a lot of times just listening to somebody's problem means the world. And we might think it's not a big deal, or we might say, but I didn't help, I just listened. And it's like, that's exactly what you needed to do.
Sometimes that's just all you need to do.
Listening and not judging them, that's what they needed in that moment. So that is huge. As you said, we can't highlight enough the importance of actually listening, to really being there for them, to help them figure out what are their talents, helping them think about goals, even maybe problem solving with them, or thinking like, have you ever thought about this? Oftentimes when I'm with children or teens, I like really pointing out those things that I see that they're good at, and I throw out ideas like, wow, you would be really good, like if you were a policeman, or you would be really good, or often with therapy, I'm like, you would be a good counselor too. Like, you're really listening, you're really caring, you're helping people, or a teacher, when people are really good at explaining things, I'll be like, wow, you could be a really good teacher. Or if they have a great imagination, it's like, wow, you're probably going to invent something new. So it's really just seeing like, what are those things they're good at, and just throwing out their ideas of what they could become. Things that maybe we don't even do ourselves, they can do it. And so having that ability to help them have those goals are often really good. And when we talk about, even like I say, maybe kids, we also really want to have a greater support than that. So knowing that school is a huge piece for children, we often want to find out if there's like a school counselor. Like, is there a school counselor that they could talk to? So let's say we just find out our child is suicidal or having these thoughts of not wanting to live anymore. So instead of just brushing that away and just hoping it just goes away and gets better, oftentimes it might be a good idea to maybe check in with the teacher, or find out if there's a school counselor that they could check in with. And be like, hey, if you ever feel down at school, is there somebody that you could go talk to? And just setting up that place there. Like, I know we talked about bullying last time too, and when things like that happen, it's having a school counselor